You could create a lot of SharePoint workflows and never need to extract substrings from strings. But if you do need this functionality, you'll want to know that it exists and how to use it, because it will save you lots and lots of time. This is a library that you haven't seen before. It's a library where we're asking employees to fill out and drop in expense reports. And the template for this library is actually an Excel template. So we didn't create this using InfoPath. It's a doc library with an Excel workbook sitting behind it, so that when a user goes in and says, I want to create a new instance of this, I want to submit my expenses, they'll go to New Document, create a new document in the library, and there's actually an Excel template that opens up. So here's the Excel template, and when we're all done, we've actually provided information for users on how we want them to save this. So what they'll do is they'll save this using the date first, a 4-digit year followed by a dash, a 2-digit month followed by another dash, the 2-digit day followed by another dash, and the word expense. Finally, a dash and then the name, and this would be the portion of the person's name that is the username and their email address. So it doesn't have to be your full name. I'm Ginny at twotreesoliveoil.com, so this comes from Ginny. And the library right now has 2 items in it. One that was my expenses, and the other I put Olivia's in for her, so they're all there. I want to take just a moment to show you how you can find more information on swapping out the template for a library so that you can use existing Word and Excel templates in this way. Let's go over to the Microsoft site, and office.microsoft.com, simply say you want in SharePoint to set a file template. And if you search for that, your results right at the very top, set a file template for a document or form library. Again, not part of the workflow class, but if you're doing workflows, this is something that you might want to know how to do. So search for SharePoint, set a file template on the Microsoft site. But let's now go back to our library, and here's the challenge. We have lots and lots of expenses in here, but we've decided that we shouldn't be saving the end date for this expense report or the reimbursee name as part of the file name. We want to be able to extract those so that we could show, here are all the expenses that were filed for this month ending date, for example. So how do we get information out of the file name to be able to put into another field? And that's where extracting a substring is just exactly what you want to be able to do. Let's swing over now to SharePoint Designer. And I'm going to create a manual workflow. Now, it's very easy going forward for us to actually prompt the user to give us the ending date for the expense submission and the name of the reimbursee as metadata, as separate data. But for all of the items that we have in there, too, but that's a representative sample out of the hundreds that are actually there, we'll want to be able to have the user just click and run a workflow. So what we're going to do is we're going to start a new workflow on our list, and we're going to call this Get Ending Date and Reimbursee from File Name. A good description. Once we've set up our workflow, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And the very first thing I'm asked to do, of course, is to go ahead and insert an action or a condition. We're going to run this manually, so I don't need a condition. The condition will be that the user chose to run this workflow. And the workflow actions that we're going to use are all part of our utility actions. There's all of our extracts and finding intervals. So the first thing we want is the date. So we're going to extract a substring from the start of the string. The date in the format that you just saw, 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day with dashes, is 10 characters long. So I'm going to copy 10 characters from the start of the string. And the question is, what string? Well, in the current item, we're actually going to go grab the name. And it's going to put it somewhere. Now, as with all of the other actions that use workflow variables, SharePoint has already set up a variable called substring, but I'm actually going to change that and create a new variable. And the variable that I'm going to create is going to be called period end date. I'm pulling it out of a string. The fact that it's a date doesn't mean that I get to pull it out as a date. All I can do is grab letters. So I'm actually counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Grab those out of the string. We'll have to convert it to a date separately. The next thing I want to do now is get the name. And so I have 10 characters for the date, followed by a dash, the word expense, and another dash. That second dash falls as the 19th character in that string. So I'm going to extract a substring from index of string. Now, I can't really subtract it at the end because end works like start. So if I subtracted it from the end, I have to know that everybody's name is the same length, for example. So if I want to be able to say that I want from this point going forward to capture the entire name, I'm going to choose index. And how that works is I say then copy from the string name starting at, and I told you that the last dash is at the 19th position, the 20th character. And I'm going to name this new variable reimbursee. So I'm grabbing both of these substrings out of the same string and tucking them into two variables. Now you know that with workflow variables, these are going to be discarded at the end of our workflow. So I need to now set up a column to put them in and stuff these items into columns. But before I do that, I just want to make sure that this piece is working. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to log this to the workflow log to make sure it works. So let's log to history list this message. And I'm going to say that the period end date is, and go grab my workflow variable that I just created called period end date. And reimbursee is, and I'll go grab that workflow variable for my reimbursee and say OK. All right, so I'm writing this to my history log. So now I'm going to just take a second and say extract substrings from file name. And let's save this, publish it, and it will now be available in our library. So let's go back to the library. Here we are, and I'm going to go to this first expense item. Now, this has been sitting here all the while I've been working in SharePoint Designer, so I'm just going to refresh this. It's a good idea to do this because I want the workflow to show up. So I'm going to click Workflows, and I'm going to say Get Ending Date and Reimbursee from File Name. Go ahead and run this. It comes back and it says it's completed. What I'd like to know is, what did it actually do? So I click the completed hyperlink, and it says period ending date is 2012-06-30, and the reimbursee is Ginny. So I can tell that both of those extracts worked exactly as I wanted them to. For right now, I'm just putting this into the log to test that functionality. But now I would go back to that workflow, I'd create a couple of columns in the list, and I would place this metadata in there using the set value in current item action.